On August 23rd, 2011, I will be releasing the Source Field Investigations with Penguin. This is a brand new book that has summarized 30 years worth of research into some of the most amazing and astonishing information that I've ever seen in my life. This is also the inauguration of our Boston Convergence Conference, where we're all gathered here for the whole weekend. So the video that people are going to see online, that's only going to be the first half an hour of a 16-hour talk. So what I'm doing here is just summarizing what we get at the beginning so that you're going to see an overview of this whole thing. The book starts out with a very interesting discussion about hypnosis, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. Hypnosis being the idea that we're walking around in some sort of trance, and I will explain what I mean by that. The trance that we're walking around in is what we call reality, because ultimately the idea of the source field is a very unique concept. It's the idea that space, time, matter, energy, biology is all being created by a universal consciousness. And that universal consciousness appears to have loving energy as its main attribute, as its main descriptor that we could use. So I propose that if this is the essence of the universe, if the universe is conscious, and everything in the universe is consciousness, then somehow the part of us that is the conscious mind must be only a small portion of what consciousness really is. And therefore, somehow we have been shielded from the truth. We've been shielded from the reality of who and what we really are. And so in a sense, it's as if we're walking around in a trance, a hypnotic trance. Now, of course, the classic hypnotist would swing a watch back and forth in order to induce hypnotic trance, but in the 1960s, they had it pretty much figured out. If you want to get somebody in a trance, let's say you're a guy and you're trying to hook up with a woman, you're trying to have sex, you use a cigar. It's a classic method. You smoke the cigar and you blow the smoke right in her face. And as it says here, blow in her face and she'll follow you anywhere. More doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And Santa Claus at some point graduated from pipe smoking up to cigarettes. So the next time it's Christmas morning and the kids are like, "Mommy, Daddy, what's that smell?" "Oh, that's just Santa Claus. He's puffing away while he's filling up your chimney. Don't worry about it. Filling up your stocking. No big deal. It's just Santa." So let's face it, you could get hit by a bus tomorrow, so go on, have a fag. That's what they used to call it, honestly, you know. These advertisements that I showed you are advertisements that are intended to manipulate public opinion. They're actually hypnotic inductions. We have been given so many programs to think a certain way, to feel a certain way, to behave a certain way, and the advertisements just drill that into our head over and over again. And those advertisements are but a subset of a much greater hypnosis that is what we would consider common thinking. What do people think reality is? What's commonly accepted? What's considered common knowledge? Some people seem to be able to have telepathy, even telekinesis, very unusual, profound abilities. And the question keeps coming up, why do some people have this ability and others do not? And what is the source field? How do we access it? So over the course of this weekend, we're going to be answering that. And I touch on those questions in the book as well. One of the first real exposures that the mainstream had to hypnosis was the work of Dr. Cleve Backster. Now, Dr. Cleve Backster actually was working for the military and researching hypnosis on the side. And in the course of his research into hypnotic trance states, he actually took a very aggressive move. He hypnotized the secretary of the commanding general of the Counterintelligence Corps. in December 1947. Now imagine this. He walks into her office. There were very few books to read on hypnosis back then. So he had just read everything he could on the subject. He'd already had success with this in college, but then he went on after college to go into the military as a result of Pearl Harbor. So as a result of his interest in hypnosis and having seen it work before, many times before, he actually got this secretary to take a highly classified document out of a folder and give it to him while she was under hypnosis. And then she comes out of hypnosis after he'd hidden the document away, and she had absolutely no memory of having taken the document. And she knew that he'd hypnotized him, but he had told her under hypnosis, "You will not be able to remember giving me this document at all." And there's some part of our mind that just obeys the command. If you're given a command while you're under hypnosis, this part of you just very blindly obeys. So obviously he was afraid that he could get a court-martial for this, but he wanted to impress upon the military the importance of hypnosis in terms of how it could be used for intelligence purposes, including extracting information from personnel without their knowledge. Well, a letter came through very shortly after he submitted this whole experiment to the general, and the general estimated that this was of high value to military intelligence. A lot of stuff that happened with the CIA got started with Cleve Baxter. He was also the one who pioneered the methods for detecting polygraph in terms of how the skin electrical activity varies depending on whether you're telling the truth or telling a lie. Baxter found out that people who were lying would have a much higher amount of electrical activity on their skin. That was the basis of the polygraph. This brings us next to Harold Sherman. Now, he wrote a book called How to Make ESP Work for You. And that was in the late 1960s, and it was a very, very important book in my development. It was the first book I read when I was 7 years old, and I began practicing the exercises. So I was 37, just turned 38 when I finished source field investigation, so that's why I say that it literally was 30 years worth of research. Because one of the quotes that's in the book comes from this book I read by Harold Sherman when I was 7 years old. And he describes using hypnosis in a very, very unique way that we might not have realized. He's talking about a famous hypnotist named Dr. Thomas Garrett, who hypnotized the son of a famous playwright from Broadway. So this was a mainstream kid who was a high-profile person because of his father. He had a falling out with a fiancée who was going to a sorority at Wellesley College. They were going to get married. Something bad happened between them, and he thought that it was all over for good. He was really distraught about this, so he went to Dr. Thomas Garrett seeking hypnotherapy, seeking some sort of treatment for this. Now, here's the strange thing. Dr. Thomas Garrett had experience with hypnotizing people and telling them that under hypnosis they can fly, they can go anywhere they want, they can walk through walls, and it's no big deal. It's just a natural ability that we all have, as if when you're hypnotized, you're automatically having an out-of-body experience, having an astral projection. So this son of the Broadway playwright was instructed to go to the sorority building while he was hypnotized to visit his fiancée. And sure enough, he was able to go there. He was told that he could fly right through her door. And in fact, he did go right through the door. He then found her at her desk, and she was actually writing him a letter, hoping that they would be able to get back together and reconcile their engagement. He was so excited about this that it almost knocked him out of hypnosis. But Dr. Garrett was able to keep him calm enough so that he could look over her shoulder and read the letter that she was writing. So he dictated the letter word by word, and Dr. Thomas Garrett wrote down every single word that he said, exactly what the letter was. So the session finishes. He said, wow, wouldn't that be nice if that was true? It was pretty cool, because he was instructed to remember everything that happened in a post-hypnotic suggestion. Well, the next day, he gets a special delivery telegram, and the telegram is the exact same letter from his fiancée sent to him, and Dr. Thomas Garrett in his file had her letter and his original handwritten notes, and they were only off by a couple words. So he was literally able to read the letter that she wrote, word for word, dictated out loud. Thomas Garrett wrote it down. Now, this was done in like the 1930s, and so it seems that there is a deliberate suppression in place to keep this information from us. Here's another very fascinating piece of information. A remote viewing experiment that was done in China. Now, of course, remote viewing is the next logical extension of what I've just told you. Remote viewing would be taking that principle where you could have an out-of-body experience, go somewhere else, see something that's worthwhile information, and bring it back. They then, in the military, standardized this process to get it to the point where you could do it by yourself while you're conscious, so that part of your mind is awake, part of your mind is asleep, and you're able to fly around and actually see these things out there in the world. Now, the Chinese were studying extra high functioning, or what they called EHF psychics, in a laboratory. And in this one particular remote viewing experiment, they were looking at a Chinese character, a complex Chinese character, while they were being under the influence of the remote viewing. They went to this one room where the character was, and they had to read which character it was. They didn't even know what it was going to be. They didn't know if it was going to be a character or anything else. But here's the trick. The Chinese character was located in a room that was completely dark. There was no way that light could get into this room. But they had light sensors in the room. And what they found was that during the times that they accurately saw the target, they actually could read the Chinese character and figure out which one it was, surges of up to 15,000 photons showed up in that room. So now think about Thomas Garrett and the son of the Broadway playwright, and here's this guy floating into the sorority and seeing his girlfriend write the letter. He dictates the letter, it's 100% correct. The Chinese proved that there is actually a measurable energy that we give off when we are going out of body and going to these places. So that's a fascinating discovery, because what it reveals is that this astral body is not some fantasy. It's a real energetic presence that actually is giving off photons of light, measurable photons. So another very interesting thing with hypnosis is the idea of a post-hypnotic suggestion. Cleve Baxter, who I showed you before, would use post-hypnotic suggestion in front of large audiences. Specifically, what he would do in many cases is tell someone who was under hypnosis, when you come out of hypnosis, you will not be able to see me or hear me for a half an hour. I could be walking right in front of you, but you won't see or hear anything. It's like I don't even exist. Then he brings the guy out of hypnosis. Now, sure enough, the man comes out of trance, and the whole audience is laughing, but he can't see Baxter at all. Baxter's walking around, the guy doesn't see him at all. The craziest part was that Baxter actually picked up a cigarette, lit it, and started smoking, and blowing smoke clouds into the air. All the guy saw was the cigarette levitating, and smoke just pouring out of nothingness in the air. And he actually got really freaked out and wanted to run out of the room, and it was the audience calming him down that got him to stay. He had no idea that Baxter was there. But at exactly 30 minutes later, and people had timed this, all of a sudden he could see Baxter again like nothing was wrong. Now this guy's in a waking state of consciousness. He didn't think anything was different. When you're under post-hypnotic suggestions, you don't realize that anything about your reality is different. So how do we know that we're not under some kind of post-hypnotic suggestion right now? Now, just to push the envelope even further, there's an amazing story in the Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, which is a story that he personally witnessed, in which a hypnotist hypnotized the father of a young girl. And under hypnosis, he told the father that he would not be able to see his own daughter or hear her whatsoever. Now, when he comes out of hypnosis under this post-hypnotic suggestion, before he's taken out of hypnosis, the hypnotist puts the daughter right in front of her father. So literally her body is right in front of his face. He comes out of hypnosis and he's looking around the room and he cannot see her at all. He doesn't hear her giggling. Everybody else is really surprised by this. Then the hypnotist takes a pocket watch and actually pushes it into the small of her back. And he did it quickly enough that nobody in the room was able to see that it was a pocket watch. But then he said to the man who was under post-hypnotic suggestion, "Can you see what I have in my hand?" Now this man actually leaned forward and he's squinting. And sure enough, he was actually able to see that it was a pocket watch, and he was able to read the inscriptions on the pocket watch perfectly accurately, looking through the body of his daughter. Now again, bear in mind that while he was doing this, he appeared to be perfectly conscious. This part of us that's out there having out-of-body experiences, it's not like it only kicks on when you're hypnotized. This appears to be something that's going on all the time. We're just not normally aware of it. But this suggests that physical reality as we know it is much more plastic than we normally consider. Some people like to call it different frequencies or different vibrations. I know some scientists who really discourage the use of those terms, but one of the terms that we do use for this that seems to be more accurate is a density. That there could be different densities of the source field. The source field, of course, as I said, ultimately being consciousness and being the author of reality, being the author of physical matter, an intelligence that creates physical matter. So if you are given the right post-hypnotic suggestion, it appears that you can see right through physical matter. Physical matter exists at a certain density in which it appears to be solid to us, but there are other levels in which it is not solid, and under the right suggestion, it's no longer that much of an obstacle. So how do we see through that veil? If physical matter is only one frequency or one density, then what is the secret that's going to allow us to get through that veil? That's one of the big questions that I address in the source field investigations and at these weekend conferences, of which this is just the beginning of a huge adventure that we're going to be doing. I propose that we already do have an astral body that's floating around and living in the source field. So the question, do we have an astral body? Absolutely yes. There's so much evidence for that, and we're going to go through a lot of that over the course of the weekend. And I believe that that part of us that's out there floating around doesn't just send photons to the area we're looking at. Now remember, the Chinese said in their research that when the subject was accurately remote viewing the target, up to 15,000 photons burst into the room all at once. So it appears that we can send photons into a particular area that we're viewing with our mind. So why couldn't we take photons out of that area and bring them back to our mind as well? If we can send photons out, it should be a two-way circuit. And I'm going to talk about that two-way circuit a little bit later. In other words, I'm saying you could actually be floating around in your astral body, seeing things with what appears to be your eyes, although the question of whether you even have eyes in the astral body, or whether it's just an energy body is an interesting question. But let's say you're looking at something, and that something is giving off photons, and you capture it into your energy field, and you can somehow send it back to your mind. This is exactly what I believe is happening. Before we go there, though, I want to talk a little bit about non-local mind. This is another very, very fascinating discussion. Because when you get into the idea of the source field, the idea that all physical matter, all space, all time, and in fact biological life is all part of a consciousness, then your mind would be the gateway. Your mind would be the access point for that infinite consciousness. This changes the whole idea of what thoughts would actually be. We're conditioned to think that thoughts occur in the mind as just something that emerges from the result of electrical activity in the brain. What if thoughts do not simply occur in the mind? What if thoughts are like satellite TV signals? Because as we're sitting in the room right now, we're being bombarded with satellite television, broadband internet movies, satellite radio, cell phone conversations. Up until recently, it would have been broadcast television, but now that's all gone into the digital spectrum. The point is, even radio waves from a radio station, there's all this electromagnetic information that's going on around us right now. And we totally accept that. But what we don't ask ourselves is, do thoughts work that way? Could the brain, could the mind somehow be able to tune into the source field, tune into these thoughts that are out there energetically, and actually pull them in and give us a direct access to what's going on in the source field? And do we share consciousness? Do we share a mind with others? Well, going all the way back to 1983, some very, very groundbreaking research was done by Doctors William Broad and Marilyn Schlitz. They were specifically investigating a branch of remote viewing called remote influencing. Now, in remote influencing, the idea is that you try to affect other people's thoughts with your own mind. And they were trying to look at it not in terms of any negative thing or voodoo thing, like, ooh, let's see if we can get somebody to do something bad or hurt themselves or hurt somebody else. They were actually trying to look for positive ways to use this. So, for example, they found out that if participants came in for this particular study who had a high degree of anxiety, and they put them in a room, and then they went into another room, and the person in there doesn't know that anything's going on. They measure the anxiety level of that person. And then at a random time, with nothing else different, they spontaneously start trying to influence that person to make them calm down and be less anxious. And sure enough, as they did that, the person's own anxiety scores remarkably increased. And in case there's a skeptic watching this on the internet, yes, they actually measured it with physiological indicators. Heart rate went down, respiratory rate went down, and galvanic skin response, which is the electrical activity on your skin, like on the lie detector test. All of those physiological signals actually changed just by them remote influencing this person somewhere else. It doesn't mean that they handed him a magazine and he reads the magazine and then he calms down. Because as I said, they left him in there for a while and they measured the anxiety score and it stayed at a certain level, and it wasn't until they did the remote influencing that the anxiety changed. Now the next study is even more fascinating because they gave people tests to see how well they could concentrate. And they found that through remote influencing, they could actually improve people's ability to concentrate. You literally can have someone else do the thinking for you. They join with your mind, and you become more effective at thinking. Now, somebody can say, okay, well, maybe we have an ability to calm people down, and maybe because you calm down, that made you think better. But it can't be that there's any real information other than this general calming effect that could be transmitted. And that's not true either. In science, there is a documented phenomenon called the multiples effect. Now, the phenomenon of multiples was cataloged as having occurred 148 times by 1922. Now, what is multiples? Multiples refers to different scientists who are isolated from each other, who are not reading about each other's work, independently coming up with exactly the same discoveries at almost exactly the same time. And I'm just going to give you a few examples. Calculus was discovered independently by more than one scientist at a time. The theory of evolution wasn't just Darwin. There was other scientists working on it at the same time. Decimal fractions. The discovery of the oxygen molecule. The discovery of color photography. The discovery of logarithms. The discovery of sunspots in the 1600s. The discovery of the law of conservation of energy. 6 different people simultaneously invented the thermometer, each of whom thinking that they discovered it themselves and that they deserve the credit for it. 9 different people independently discovered the telescope at the same time, and all wanted to be credited with the discovery. Multiple individuals invented a typewriter at the same time, and 5 different people invented the steamboat at the same time. So what I'm telling you is that as we're working on these problems, as our mind is trying to solve something, and we start to have new insights, it's as if those insights are actually creating an informational field, a code that goes into this global mind that we're all sharing, and other people can access that information directly. Now, in the book, I also cite a paper from Sperry Andrews, which is actually a proposal to talk about things like this on television. And he requested something like $711,000 to finance these television programs, and he hasn't been able to get the financing, which I find astonishing, because this information is so groundbreaking, it deserves to be seen and heard by everyone. In his proposal, he includes the fact that there are over 500 studies, scientifically controlled, proving that consciousness affects biological systems as well as electrical systems. Now, the overall likelihood that this could be some sort of chance, that there could be any other explanation for why this is working other than that we all share consciousness, that we're all psychic, is less than 1 chance in a trillion. That should get some attention. I mean, at this point, we have to surrender the skepticism. And again, in the book, I bury you with data. There are so many references. I'm only giving the slightest little hints of each thing because it just goes on and on and on. But I've given you some of the most interesting ones. Scientific multiples is a wonderful example. 148 different cases by 1922. But the shared mind effect that I find the most fascinating and the most important for everyone to know today would be what I call the meditation effect. The meditation effect was proposed and tested by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the same Maharishi who the Beatles went to visit in the late 1960s. That's how he got so popular in the first place. The Maharishi was of the belief that if you got square root of 1% of the world's population together in one room, that those people, if they meditated, could have an effect upon everyone in the world. So sure enough, what they found with the Maharishi, or what I call the meditation effect, is that 7,000 people meditating together caused a 72% reduction in terrorism around the world. Now, how does this work? What I'm trying to say here is that the thoughts of violence were influenced to a very disproportionate level by thoughts of love, peace, and harmony. The people who were going through this meditative practice were reaching a state they called pure consciousness, which means that your mind is uplifted, you feel extremely blissful, and extremely at peace. And in that state of consciousness, there appears to be some sort of radiant effect that goes through everyone's mind on earth, so that your emotional feeling is actually not just a private event. The way you feel in your mind and in your heart is influenced by the world to such an extent that 3 out of 4 people worldwide decided not to pick up that gun and commit an act of violence, not to blow up that suitcase bomb, not to crash that plane, not to dive in through the wall, or whatever it is that they want to do to cause mayhem and chaos. So think about that the next time that you start feeling stress, anger, concern, worry, etc. It's a good habit to get into the practice of asking, is this mine or someone else's? And there are many, many studies in the book, for example, from the Institute of Heart Math, showing that if you live next door to someone else, that you actually will synchronize brainwave patterns, heart rate, respiratory rate, and even galvanic skin response. The person who you might not ever speak to, well, I live in Los Angeles, so I can speak from personal experience, right? When I lived in Santa Monica, there were people living right next door to me. I didn't know who they were. I saw them occasionally, but they're only 20 or 30 feet away. Do you think the source field is interrupted by those walls? No. The source field goes right through the wall. Now, here's the cool part, though. Whoever had more coherence in their brain waves, heart rate, respiratory rate, and galvanic skin response won out over the other person. So the loving energy, the loving consciousness superseded the negative consciousness. And obviously in the meditation effect, it has a worldwide effect. Just a small group of people getting together and working on this can have a disproportionate effect on how everyone thinks and feels. And that is an astonishing fact. It's been proven in over 39 different studies. And again, the odds are at billions to 1 against chance that anything else could have been responsible. They ruled out weekends, weather, police and crime activities. They ruled out government changes, everything. The only thing that caused this was people meditating. So this brings us to the pineal gland, something that I talked about in my other video, 2012 Enigma, which I never would have imagined that by December 1st, 2008, that video was #1 most viewed on Google for that day. It was an astonishing thing that happened. And it's done a lot of good that it got so popular. But I do talk about the pineal gland at some length in that video. And here I want to talk about the pineal gland specifically as the center in the brain, the physiological center that is the access point between your astral body that's out there floating around and the physical body. Now, let's say you're trying to solve this scientific problem and you're trying to discover calculus, or you're trying to discover decimal fractions, or you're trying to discover color photography, and you're working on the problem. I believe that you have this astral body that's actually going around and looking for people who are working on the same problem in the source field. And when you see somebody else who's working on it, you're spying on them. And you'd probably be giving off photons in the room where that person was. But it also appears that you have direct access to the actual information of their thoughts, that you can actually pick up from a universal data bank, or at least in a worldwide data bank, the same information that they already have. So the pineal gland, according to many, many different ancient traditions, appears to be the main access point between that astral body and the physical body. It's the physiological center that determines how psychic information gets in. As you can see here, it's in the middle of the brain, and it is shaped like a pine cone. If you look there on the right, that's a drawing of what the pineal gland looks like. It's actually upside down from where it really is in the brain. But it is a small gland. It's about the shape of a pea. It has kind of a reddish, purplish color inside the brain. And there's some interesting things about it, because when you look at these ancient traditions, we find many, many different traditions giving pine cone type examples in their literature. Now, first of all, we go to Babylon. Babylon has the legend of the primitive mountain. It is said to be the location on earth where the gods contact humanity. In sculptures of the so-called primitive mountain, it's shaped much like a pine cone or the idea of the pineal gland. When we go into Babylonian art, we see sculptures of the god Tammuz actually holding a pine cone in his hand as if this is a very important tool that he's using in his work, which may well be psychic. In Egypt, we have the Ben stone. Stones are often used to depict the pineal gland. You can clearly see in this image that the stone is shaped like the pineal gland. There are two serpents coming at it on either side. Those serpents are called the uraeus, and they represent the kundalini energy, which is believed to be coming up from the root chakra through the 33 vertebrae into the brain. And number 33, that sounds familiar, 33 vertebrae. Well, one of the things I have in the book is a quotation from Manly Palmer Hall saying that the 33 degrees of Freemasonry actually correspond to the 33 vertebrae in the spine, and that the goal of Masonry is to get the adept to awaken the pineal gland. But as we're going to see, it's not just Masonry that's doing this, it's major world religions of all different varieties. So many of them keep giving us the same metaphor. The Egyptian metaphor is also interesting because you'll notice on either side of that Ben stone are two birds. Those birds are called Bennu. But when the Bennu was translated into Greek, the word got changed to phoenix. So the phoenix is obviously the bird that dies and is reborn. It is consumed in flames, it collapses to ash, and then it is reborn out of the flames. So it appears that this is the pineal gland and that there's a message here about this sort of astral body that's going out there, flying around. It's dying and reborn. When you go into your out-of-body experience, you're flying around in this other form. But then it dies when you come back to your physical body, only to be reborn when you have another out-of-body experience later on. In Egyptian mythology, the staff of Osiris, and we're going to meet him in a little bit here, has a pine cone on the top with the two uraeus serpents intertwining up towards it. Again, this represents the Kundalini spiral, and those two serpents twining together, according to many scholars who are sort of on the fringe, also could represent the DNA molecule. When they spiral together, it looks like the double helix. When we see this image of King Tut, one of the gods on earth, we see the uraeus serpents coming out of his forehead, where the pineal gland is located. The Hindu god Shiva, and I have to apologize to the internet community, I've had about 580 emails telling me it's not a goddess, it's a guy, all right? Now, when I looked at this image the first time, I said, okay, that's a pretty hot-looking babe. So, you know, I'm not gay, but let's say if that person walked up to me, started hitting on me, maybe I could be coerced. I don't know. Dude looks like a lady. That's all I'm saying, okay? So I apologize to the world that I said Shiva was a woman, because Shiva is a dude. He's just a very, very effeminate dude who wears mascara, eyeliner, has long hair, and looks hot. Okay, that's all I'm saying. So this man has this interesting hair which is stylized to look like the pineal gland. It's very obvious when you look at the image. And he has the uraeus serpents wrapped around his neck, and he has the bindi, or the third eye symbol, in between the eyebrows. Now remember, we've already gone through Babylonian tradition, Egyptian tradition, now we're into Hinduism, which is a geographically isolated culture with exactly the same symbols. Well, now we're going over to Mesoamerica, clear on the other side of the world, and here it is again. This is Viracocha. This is the Mayan god who is the lord of the underworld. And what we're seeing is a very complex image in this sculpture where he is emerging in his face from the mouth of a serpent. The serpent, according to various scholars like John Major Jenkins, represents the galaxy, and specifically he believes there's a lot of Mayan art that says that at the end of this Mayan calendar cycle, that the ecliptic plane of the Earth, the tilt of the Earth, aligns with the center of the galaxy. It's actually perfect around 1998, but it's pretty close to 2012. So that's one of the things we have. But if you look at this image, the coils of the serpent appear to look like the pineal gland. Very, very similar. And what's even more interesting, which I don't know if you're going to be able to see it too well here, is that he has this necklace around the serpent's tongue. It's as if he's wearing a necklace, and many of the parts of the necklace appear to be pine cones with energy waves streaming into them. And I have a great picture of this in the book. We did a line art illustration of this in the book. So he's literally wearing this big necklace full of little pineal glands with energy waves shooting into them, and the whole entire structure he's in looks like a pineal gland. And of course, this was a white-skinned god in an area in which no one else had white skin. Very interesting fact. Here's another image from Mesoamerica of a sculpture in which pine cones are very prominently illustrated. Another very interesting flagging of the pineal gland, and there are others. Teotihuacan's temple has pine cones all over the place, which might be corn, but it looks an awful lot like a pine cone. It doesn't really look like corn. Now we move on into Greek tradition. They have the omphalos stone, as you see here, a very clear illustration of a pineal gland. And it is believed that the omphalos, again, is where the gods first land when they come to humanity. And it was also used by the oracles to be in contact with the gods. So the legend of the omphalos is that it is a stone that allows you to contact the gods directly. And of course, it also is symbolic of the pineal gland inside the brain, which would do the same thing. Dionysus, the Greek god of death and rebirth, also has the pine cone on the end of his staff, as you saw before. Bacchus is what he got named when he goes into Roman tradition, and he kind of gets shifted around a little bit into the god of drunkenness and revelry. But once again, it's the pineal gland, the pine cone on the top of his staff. Now we're going to go into a whole other area. We've already hit off Babylon, Hinduism, Egypt, Mesoamerica. Now we're going into Asia, and we're looking at Buddhism. And Buddha's hair is stylized like a pineal gland, just like we saw with the god Shiva. And he also has the bindi, the third eye, once again. You go over to Ireland, another geographically isolated region, and they have this Turo stone, which again is shaped just like everything else, the pineal gland, and it appears to have flickering stylized flames across its surface. Now there are many, many coins that have been minted that have images of the omphalos or the pineal gland stylized as a stone, and there's many of them to choose from. I'm just going to give you a couple. This one is from Greece, and it actually has the uraeus serpent surrounding the omphalos, which is that which contacts the gods. Roman tradition has many, many pictures of this same stone, except in Roman tradition, it gets renamed from omphalos to betel. And it's a little funny because the AE is kind of pronounced E, so it's more like beetle. Now, interestingly enough, this appears to be the derivative of Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. The birthplace of Jesus, the Christ consciousness, it's a metaphor through the betel in the mind, through the pineal gland. That's how the Christ consciousness is awakened. And here on a Roman coin, we have the eagle symbolizing the phoenix, the Bennu bird, when you go back to the Egyptian sculpture, and the Egyptian painting I showed you. The Bennu bird is here, the eagle, not the phoenix, and he's poised on top of that betel stone. Well, the Romans also did something else very interesting with the betel stone. This is all historically documented. I'm not making this up. They stylized the betel stone as if it were a pyramid. Now that's interesting. The betel became a pyramid. And if you look there on the bottom, one of those pyramids has a capstone on it. There's a clear line of demarcation, and the top is a capstone. And on the other side of many of these coins would be the winged god. And in another example, we have a Roman coin with the betel on one side and the eagle on the other. Now, if this is all starting to sound curiously familiar, you're right. Because the Great Seal of the United States has the eagle on one side, and then it has the pyramid on the other. Just like we see in Roman coins. The eagle is another symbol of the gods, which in some cases they actually drew the gods. The betel, the third eye, the pineal gland, got stylized to become a stone and then became a pyramid with the capstone on it. But this is a Roman coin that's now reiterated on American currency. So what's going on here? That third eye on top of the pyramid could very well be the third eye in the brain, could be the opened pineal gland. So is there a hidden message in this symbol? I'm going to get into that very soon. So all this Roman tradition, I'm showing you Greek coins, Roman coins, it's very clear that there's been this pineal gland tradition that stayed true for long periods of time. And of course, you remember me talking in the 2012 Enigma about the Vatican, which has this Court of the Pine Cone, this massive bronze sculpture. One of the largest sculptures in the Vatican is a big, gigantic pine cone. And look at those birds on either side of the pine cone. Those are the Bennu birds, the Egyptian phoenix birds, symbolizing the transmutation of the soul that is possible when you awaken your pineal gland. And they have the open sarcophagus in front of that pine cone, which symbolizes a time where there will be no more death. You can clearly see someone posing in front of this sculpture, how massive in size it is. And of course, along the bottom, we have these two Egyptian-style Sphinx-type lions who are lying on top of a pedestal that has Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. So for this to be seen in the Vatican should be scandalous, but nobody seems to look at it any differently. Now here's something new. This is a sculpture, a photograph of a sculpture that is in the Court of the Pine Cone. If you look on the right, you see a big hollow space inside the building, and inside that hollow space is the pineal gland sculpture, the Court of the Pine Cone. There's the bronze pine cone, right? But then to the left, in the middle of the court, is this massive bronze sculpture. Look at the people standing around it. You can see it's like 3 times the height of a person. It's massive in size. And it looks like an eye. But there's something interesting about this eye, isn't there? It's got a vertically slit pupil. It's a reptilian eye. Well, that's kind of interesting. Now here it is up close. You can see what appears to be all this machinery inside of it, as if it's the gears of the cosmos turning. There's a lot of things that are suggested by this sculpture. It includes the idea of bodies in collision, perhaps ancient times where planets collided with other planets, maybe making what we now know as the asteroid belt, which is apparently one of the legends that the gods had, is what's the real nature of the asteroid belt. But you also see what appears to be the gears on the interior sphere are at a 90-degree angle to the gears on the exterior sphere. Now, why would that be significant? Well, in all these hyperdimensional physics models in which you look into higher dimensions, they always say that the higher dimensions are at a 90-degree right angle turn away from the dimensions in our reality. Now, that's obviously ludicrous, because you can go anywhere in space you want, make a right angle turn, you're still going to be in space. You're not going to suddenly wink off into a higher dimension. But that's the prevailing model, and that appears to be part of what this is intended to tell you. Your pineal gland is a gateway to higher dimensions that you access with your consciousness. In the Vatican, you have these obelisks with the Christian crucifix apologetically included at the top. So they're clearly borrowing from these ancient Egyptian mythologies, showing that there's an obsession with this stuff, right on up through the staff that the Pope himself is holding, which has an unambiguous pine cone right above the part where his hand is, and below the part where Jesus is, representing, again, the Christ consciousness. And Jesus is on a tree, representing the world tree, this consciousness field that we're all a part of, all the branches of the tree connecting everyone's minds together and connecting us out to the universe. Well, that pine cone seems to symbolize the Pope's mind being in direct contact with that Christed awareness, with that higher consciousness. And even in the Bible, just so that Christians don't feel left out, there are some absolutely obvious quotes from Jesus that clearly indicate that he was aware of the pineal gland and how important it is to any spiritual path, including the positive, loving awakening of consciousness that he was trying to teach us. In the book of Matthew, Jesus says, "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore your eye be single, your whole body shall be full of light." And that's chapter 6, verse 22 in the book of Matthew. If your eye be single, your whole body shall be full of light. It doesn't mean that you got to poke one of your eyes out in order to become psychic. It's saying that when your pineal gland opens, your body becomes enlightened and aware. Jesus always was speaking in parables, so this is a hidden metaphor for the pineal gland. Well, let's not leave out Islam, the Muslims. Here is an illustration of Mecca and this building that you see with massive numbers of people around it in the middle of a pilgrimage. Now, the building is normally covered by black curtains, as you see here. Occasionally, what they do during these pilgrimages is they will actually lift up the curtain, which is a very interesting symbolic metaphor for the awakening of the psychic mind, the awakening of the consciousness of the adept, peeling away the veil. Well, do they go any further than that with the metaphor? Absolutely. What you're seeing now is a cutaway diagram of what's actually inside that building. Okay, well, it just looks like there's a tile floor, not too much to see, 3 pillars. That's all fine and good, and there could be all kinds of symbolism there, but specifically what I'm interested in is at the very bottom of this illustration. If you look carefully on this illustration, you can see at the very bottom that there is what appears to be an eye, but it's tilted vertically. Inside this metal sculpture is the Kaaba stone, the actual piece of black stone that is believed to be an extraterrestrial artifact in Islam. And people go up on their pilgrimage and they kiss the stone. The holster apparently was built around it in order to keep the pieces from falling apart because the stone actually cracked. The whole reason why everybody goes to Mecca is they circumambulate around this building, meaning they walk around it in circles, they go up to the stone and they kiss the stone. And as you can very clearly see, it is a stylized third eye, clearly indicating that the Arabs also believed that the trick to Muhammad's abilities, to Jesus' abilities, Jesus is seen as a master teacher in Islam, is the awakening of the pineal gland. But you're only going to get this in advanced Islamic mysticism like the Sufism tradition. That's where they get into the pineal gland awakening. And of course, the Freemasons also borrowed from Sufism, which is why when you get up to the 32nd, 33rd degrees, you become a Shriner, and they have those funny little fez caps on. And the fez cap is taken right out of Sufism. So this legend of the pineal gland is worldwide. It's infused through all these different religions, all these different traditions keep showing us the same thing. Now, how does this actually work inside the brain? The trick to understanding the pineal gland is to realize it's not just a chunk of flesh. It's mostly hollow. And inside that hollow area is water floating around. Then the interior tissue that the water is connected to has little cells that are called pinealocytes. And the pinealocytes appear to be almost exactly the same as the rods and cones in the retina of the eye. In the book, I have hardcore mainstream science studies one after another analyzing these pinealocytes, saying that they look like the rods and cones in the retina, and breaking it down as well, because it turns out that the pineal gland is wired into the visual cortex of the brain just like the eyeball. They actually call it a phototransduction cascade. So what's the big deal with the water? I mean, if you have this retina inside your mind, it's wired up like an eye, it has retinal tissue, what the heck is it looking at? Well, it appears that there's crystals in the water, and then darkness activates some sort of electromagnetic shield around that water, which then allows it to open itself to the source field. So, when you get this electromagnetic activity, and I'm going to explain all this as we go on, the electromagnetic activity as your pineal gland fires up, you'll feel this pressure, this buzzing sensation like a tone or an acceleration in your head. If you read books about people doing out-of-body work, it's often said that they have this sudden cracking sound in their head as they go out of body. A very loud, something like that. Sorry, that's really loud. But that pressure, that feeling like there's a sound in your mind, appears to be this electromagnetic shield firing up in the brain, shielding off the radio waves and all the conventional electromagnetic signals from our reality. And without those signals getting in the way, the source field can bleed its way through. And in that source field, time is non-local. Remember, I said the source field creates space, time, matter, energy, and biology. So when you go into the source field, you have three-dimensional time. Time is no longer local, it's no longer linear, it's non-local and non-linear. You can jump around in time. And that's a discussion I got into in 2012 Enigma, and it's a discussion that I go into great detail about in the book with amazing, voluminous new information about this three-dimensional parallel reality that intersperses with our own reality all the time. Water appears to be the key. The water that's floating in the pineal gland is one of the main things that is able to flip-flop back and forth from our reality to a parallel reality. And I explain how that flip-flopping is possible in the book. And we're going to do it throughout this weekend in the conference that you guys are here to see. Then this inner retina is recording visual images that are coming in from whatever this water is doing. That seems to be the mechanism. The water is shielded off, and that automatically happens when you go to sleep. Every time you go to sleep, that pineal gland fires up, and then you actually have dreams which appear to be in a whole other reality. I have multiple studies in the book showing people having shared dreaming realities, clear examples time and again that the place that you go when you're remote viewing or when you're out of body or when you're dreaming is a real place. Also the place of ghosts. Ghosts or apparitions. There's a case of somebody that Raymond Moody talks about dying in the operating room, visiting their loved ones out of body. The loved one actually sees them as a ghost. They have a conversation. The person is then resuscitated, and they both remember the same conversation. So you were alive, but dead, and then while you're dead, you go visit somebody else, and they can see you, and you look just like a ghost. That's your existence in the source field. So if you're out there looking at things in your astral body, maybe somehow you're capturing those photons and bringing them back to the physical body. This brings us to this concept of DMT. Dr. Rick Strassman, of course, wrote the book DMT, the Spirit Molecule, a doctor's revolutionary research into the biology of near-death and mystical experiences. There's been a lot of intrigue around the idea of DMT. Why does it work? Why do all these shamanic potions seem to have so much of this chemical in them? Dr. Rick Strassman cites a lot of evidence in this book that the main point where DMT is synthesized in the body is the pineal gland. It has all the right receptors, all the right enzymes, all the right chemical catalysts, and we know that it has melatonin in it, and there's only a couple short chemical shifts that you have to make from melatonin to get DMT. Well, the problem is that DMT degrades so quickly that nobody's been able to autopsy a dead body fast enough to find DMT in the pineal gland, because it breaks down in just a few minutes. But this brings us to Nick Sand, who is the son of one of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project, which created nuclear bombs. Now, Nick Sand is personally responsible for manufacturing over 250 million doses of LSD. He was the main guy responsible for creating almost all of the acid that was being taken at Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco in the 1960s. He was the Pied Piper of LSD for sure. He got caught for it. He was given a 15-year jail sentence. He evaded it for some 23 years. He finally turned himself in 1996. He served a 4-year sentence and got out in 2000. Now that's all documented. He did his time. But while he was still at large, before he ever even got arrested, and he was out there synthesizing everybody's acid, He also synthesized DMT in the lab. And this is a direct quote from this Erowid Vault website. EROWID is the website. And I quote this in the book. Here's the thing that happened. He found that DMT had full color lighting effects on a very interesting level. Here's what happened. This is a quote from Erowid now. When hardened DMT that had collected in a tray after he synthesized it was being chipped out with a hammer and a screwdriver in a room that was brightly lit, the blows emitted massive amounts of colored light. So imagine this room is brightly lit. Imagine that I'm standing here and I have this tray and I hit it with a hammer, and then you're seeing red, and then you see blue, and then you see green and yellow. And it's bright enough that it's like, wow, it really lights up the room. That's what they're saying here. But what was doing that was DMT. Now, what's the property of that? Well, if you ever had a cigarette lighter and you push the button down, it goes click, and then you see that spark. Do you know what that click is? Do you know how that spark is made? It's a crystal inside that's compressed. And through a process called piezoluminescence, the crystal, as it's compressed, those molecules release this burst of light, which releases photons. That's called piezoluminescence. That's how you get the spark that lights your cigarette. The same thing's been done with crystal radios. That's a piezoelectric crystal. The crystal actually is responding to electromagnetic waves, which are radio waves, and it actually vibrates in those waves, and you can pick it up. That's how they were able to make radios that don't require any electrical power. The electromagnetic frequencies of radio waves make that crystal vibrate, and then you can listen to it and pick up the radio. And depending on how tightly you compress the crystal determines what radio stations you'll get. Because as you tighten the pressure on the rock, it actually, the molecular distance narrows, and then it tunes into different frequencies of the radio spectrum. But here what we're seeing not only is piezoluminescence, but piezochromatism, which means that the photons the crystal gives off when it's compressed, in this case by hitting it with a screwdriver, actually change color. So if you wanted to have a nanotechnology projector, like what I'm using right now, but on a quantum level, if you wanted to get a full color image on a quantum level, you would need piezochromatic crystals to do that. You'd need crystals that when they're compressed, depending on how you compress them, release different colors, so you can actually get a full color image. That's what I'm actually saying is going on. The pineal gland has DMT crystals, calcite crystals, and other crystals that are floating around in that water, and they appear to be piezochromatic, meaning that as they're compressed by energy fields, they give off colors of light, different colors, a full color image, ultimately. When you shield off the electromagnetic signals going into your pineal gland by that energy firing up, the source field, which is just as energetic as electromagnetic energy, it's the same basic substrate, it's actually what gives rise to electromagnetic energy. The source field is able to vibrate those crystals and release the photons of whatever your astral body is seeing. So literally what I'm saying is that as your astral body is out there floating around looking at things, you pick up those photons, you send them back to your pineal gland, and then it vibrates those crystals and gets caught by the retinal tissue and fired into the visual cortex of the brain. This is explained by the idea of the silver cord. Many people, when they go out of body, claim to be seeing a silver cord that is connecting their astral body to their physical body. The vast majority of these reports say that the cord is connected at the exact location where the pineal gland would be, in the middle of the eyebrows or at the back of the head. And it's in the same location in your astral body. So what if this silver cord is actually a traversable wormhole? What if it is literally a stargate connecting your physical body to your astral body, so that in your astral body you're looking at photons, and you could be sending photons through that cord out to where you're looking. Remember the Chinese remote viewing experiment? They saw photons appearing in the room. The photons are captured by your astral body, they shoot through the silver cord, they go into your pineal gland, and then of course it picks it up. So the key again is to shield yourself off from the conventional electromagnetic fields that are all around us most of the time. It's important to realize, too, that the water inside your pineal gland is the trick. If you don't have the water fully flowing, then calcium is going to build up because the pineal gland is not protected by the blood-brain barrier. So that calcification can actually grab onto the DMT crystals, the calcite crystals, and this has all been documented, believe me, I'm not making this up, it's all in the book. The calcification can get so extreme, as you see here, that almost the entire pineal gland is just a bony lump that actually shows up on x-rays and allows them to figure out if you have a brain tumor, because the tumor pushes the brain off to one side and the bony lump actually moves. So look, you don't want this to happen. And the trick to making sure this doesn't happen is making sure that you're having a pure diet. There are so many things in our Western dietary system that calcify the pineal gland and will make you much less psychic. And that includes, the biggest offenders would be refined sugar, white flour, fried food, and factory-raised meat. If you can eat ethically raised organic meat, or none at all, but a little meat is good. If you can have, specifically fish would be like the best pineal gland activating meat to have. Organic fruits, organic vegetables, lots of fresh, clean water. Specifically, the best kind of water would be reverse osmosis. You want to get those minerals out of your body. You got to give your body a chance to decalcify. And the more organic and raw food you can eat, the faster that's going to work. Whereas all these other foods, like white flour, which is in everything, pasta, bread, that's going to calcify your pineal gland and make you notably less psychic. And if your pineal gland gets really, really calcified, it's related to anxiety disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenia. It's even related to tremors like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease. All are correlated with a calcified pineal gland, as I reveal in the book. So I don't think that this information has remained obscure. I believe that the reason why you see the Great Seal of the United States on the back of the dollar with that third eye in the triangle on top, the reason why that's there is because they know about this. And you even see it here in this poster from the Da Vinci Code, the triangle around her eye. It's the same thing. Well, the source field is directly related to biology, and this is how we launch off into understanding these ancient prophecies of the dollar bill and everything else, which I'm going to get into that. We see now that we are actually emerging from the source field, that life is an emergent phenomenon that comes directly out of the basic laws of quantum physics. This was discovered very recently, just as the book was going to print. I'm so glad that I was a slacker and didn't get the book done on time, because as a result, I was able to get this study into the book, so important, from Dr. Luc Montagnier. Here he is, in his lab, Nobel Prize-winning scientist, who did this discovery, as you see in this headline, can our DNA electromagnetically teleport itself? One researcher thinks so. And if you read the bottom, it says, Nobel Prize winner Luc Montagnier describes a phenomenon in which DNA emits electromagnetic signals of its own construction, ghost DNA that can be mistaken by enzymes as the real deal and replicated in another place. Essentially, it's DNA teleportation. Now, this was all over the place. It was all over the science journals and everything. What you're seeing here is the actual picture in the middle describing how this was done. I like this image of him because here he's got two vessels of water next to him, and this is exactly what happened. He had one vessel of water that had DNA floating in it, just a little bit. And then another vessel of water, another test tube, that didn't have DNA in it. And it was totally sterilized water. And then all he did is electrify the two tubes that were hermetically sealed with a 7 hertz electrostatic signal, as you see where it says generator 7 hertz there. The tube on the left has the DNA, the tube on the right does not, but then after 18 hours of zapping, the tubes that did not have the DNA in it had all of the exact signatures of DNA being there. That's an astonishing fact. And it's very controversial, it's very cutting edge, because how in the heck do hydrogen and oxygen molecules in purified water turn into DNA? It completely boggles the rational mind. How in the heck could that happen? But it goes beyond that. This scientist, Professor Ignacio Pacheco, came up with this study, which is a big mouthful. But what we really want to focus on here is what he did. Pacheco takes a tube of regular water with sterilized beach sand that had been heated up to 1,000 degrees Celsius. He then lets it cool off. He puts it inside the test tube with the distilled water. He caps it off, and he sterilizes that, and then waits 24 hours, and this little scum grows at the top, which he called a surfactant, just to be scientific. Scum doesn't sound scientific enough. Now, if you don't sterilize the beach sand, if you just take this beach sand, dump it in the tube, sterilize the tube with the water in it, wait 24 hours, scrape it off, and look at it under a microscope, this is all you get. Just a bunch of blobs. The trick was sterilizing the sand. Just like in Montagnier's research, where he had those 2 tubes of water, he sterilized the water, okay? In this case, he gets these little guys growing in the water. But all it is in there is sterilized beach sand. This one actually looks almost like a brain. It's got 2 hemispheres. This clearly looks like it was the beginning of a plant that was growing. Obviously, it broke off in the course of going on the microscope slide. You can see where the stem broke off, and obviously the roots are no longer visible. And then even individual leaves started falling off from these little plants that were growing. Here's one of them. And here it is up close, an image of the cells inside the leaf. Very clearly a living biological creature, a little biological plant in this case. Here you see what looks like a red blood cell with a little diamond below it. That would be the silicon starting to crystallize. Now you see what looks like a white blood cell. Here we have what appears to be some sort of larger organism. It's a larger object. And in some of these cases, they begin to form a hard shell around them, almost as if they're becoming shellfish. This could be actually a spiraling little seashell starting to form. And then this guy, this is the one that really blew me away the most. You have a head, you have a body, you have a whole defensive system of spikes built around that creature. And I ask you this question: where the heck did his DNA come from? Where the heck did the DNA come from in Luc Montagnier's test tube that was zapped with 7 hertz electrostatic energy? The answer is DNA appears to be written right into the source field. It's written into the information that makes our reality. Now, not only is life being created by the source field, but it appears that you can beam in different codes to the source field and change one organism to another. This appears to be the real mechanism of evolution. And this was discovered by Dr. Peter Gariev using nothing more than laser light. This is what he did. Here he is on Russian television. Here he is doing a lecture. So you can see this is a real guy. Here he is in his lab. Now, the research that he conducted involved eggs that were laid by a frog. The eggs that were laid by a frog were still embryonic. They hadn't gone very far. Then he has a salamander. He takes the eggs from the salamander and zaps them with a green laser, and then redirects that laser light from the salamander eggs into the frog eggs. And by nothing more than that, the frog eggs had a complete metamorphosis and transformed into salamanders with no evidence of ever having come from a frog in the first place. So what I'm trying to tell you here is that the source field is the source of life. It is not random Darwinian mutation. Charles Darwin's father was a 33rd degree Mason. So do you think maybe there was a reason for them coming out with this idea that if you're the best killer, that you might be the most highly evolved on the planet? Well, it also, Darwinian evolution very conveniently removed the idea of a higher power. Oh, it can all be explained by random. It's just a bunch of things knocking together. There's nothing divine in the universe at all. You're just going to die and that's it. You don't exist anymore. Well, I don't believe that. I believe that human life, the DNA pattern that actually takes little particles, just like the water in Montagnier's test tube was rearranged into DNA, little particles can be rearranged into DNA, and that DNA can have the full template to build a human being. Sergeant Clifford Stone, one of the Disclosure Project witnesses in May 2001, testified that there were 57 different varieties of extraterrestrial that he was exposed to in the course of his work for the Black Ops divisions of the government. 57 varieties of extraterrestrial, and they all looked more or less human. The gray with the big eyes is about as far deviated from what we look like as any of them, and many of them look a lot more like us than you would believe. So this could all be explained by this idea that DNA is a quantum emergent phenomenon. Well, this brings us to the gods that are in every ancient culture. Who were they? What did they say? Every culture worldwide has human characters showing up with advanced capabilities, levitation, telekinesis, telepathy, beams out of their hands that can kill people with one. If you get too close to them, you're trying to threaten them. Well, I'm just going to focus on a few of them. There's many more examples that I give in my all-weekend conferences. Here's the Egyptian god Osiris. Now notice the color of his skin. It's obviously green. And notice his hat. It's a very large hat, which seems unnecessary for the size head that he would normally have. Well, he's accredited with building the Osirian, where these massive blocks of stone, some of which are 100 tons, were effortlessly levitated into place, apparently. Now look at this. Here he is posing with others who do not have green skin. So what the heck is a green-skinned human doing among these other people? Well, the guy on the right wouldn't be a normal person either. He's got a hawk head. But the woman on the left doesn't have any unusual shaped head. That's probably one of the people from here. But there he is, sitting on his throne with green skin and this massive head. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. Then Osiris's son is Akhenaten. And again, he's wearing a massive hat. And you can see here the hat has a roundness to it at the top. Well, is that only a hat or is something else going on? Here's one of the images of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, his wife, with their children. Now notice from the side view that their heads are very large. The hat, at least, is very large. Well, the skeptic says that doesn't mean anything. Okay, here's another image of that from the side. And here's yet another image, a carving of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children, where you can see again the very enlarged cranium behind Akhenaten. He's the one in the front. And there it is up close. Okay, here's another image of their little children. Notice they have the same funny little body shape that he does and that Nefertiti does. And again, they have these very strange heads, which we're going to get into that a lot more in just a second here. Here's another image of Akhenaten with a very large head. So you see this is a repeating theme over and over again, and there's that body shape. Now here's an image of Nefertiti, and once again you see the shape of the head appears to encompass more of that hat than would normally be human for us. There's something going on here. Here's another image of how large that hat is, taken from an actual sculpture of her that was found in one of the graves. Now here's another image. Now look at this. You see on the right, Nefertiti's head, it's got this very large pattern around it. And here's another carving showing the unusually sized head on the right. Now that's the one that really is the money shot. Because now what we're seeing is her head without any hair, without any hat on, a very enlarged skull. This is highly, highly anomalous. It's not like any skull we see on Earth. Just to make the point clear, there is a granite carving of their daughter Amarna, and look at that head. That is at least twice the size of a regular human cranium in terms of the brain capacity. You can look at this sculpture from all different angles, and you see this is a very, very unusual phenomenon that is occurring here. Even from the back, it looks much larger than a normal human head, and that would explain the hat. If you take that skull and then you illustrate where the hat would be, now what you're seeing is it's basically a nice, comfortable winter snow hat. You just put that sucker on. It doesn't need a whole lot more in the back, but that would be a normal-sized hat. To us, it looks enormous, but if your head is that big, then you need a hat like that in order to be comfortable. Now, here's another image of Akhenaten, it's a diorite stone, a much heavier stone, and you can see again the enlarged head. And here's another carving. This was a sketch showing that enlarged head of Nefertiti, and Akhenaten's on the left. Now here's another illustration of their daughters. Again, you see that very weird-looking skull. And I want to point out that there is a noticeable difference in the shape of their body from a typical human body. Now, this looks fairly similar, except that the ratio between the rib cage and the waist, where the hips are, is a noticeably smaller rib cage. There appears to be a larger height between the sternum and the pelvis. The rib cage appears to be at least 2 inches taken in on either side from where a normal human would be. And the spine appears to be a lot longer. The length of the spine appears to be longer. Now, people might say, oh, well, this is stylized. This isn't really how they really looked. I disagree, because every illustration we see of them is of them having this really, really narrow rib cage, the unusual pot belly, which, you know, some people say, oh, well, Akhenaten must have had Marfan's syndrome. That's the only explanation for that. It's not true. Everybody's got the same thing. And here we see when they're with their children, the children appear to be fully proportional adult proportions while they're still at the size where they should normally look like infants. So it appears that their heads come out smaller, and you can actually see that same oddly shaped head in the children. And here it is again, an illustration of these children. And they all have that same funny shaped body. You can especially see it in this one. First of all, look at the proportion of the child to Akhenaten. The child is only up to his knee, but it has almost an adult proportioned body. It has that same narrow rib cage, that same funny pot belly shape. Now we go to King Tut. Same thing. He's got that big, big hat on. Once again, this is a little gold sculpture of him. Now here's a sculpture of him taken from the front. This is not the one you usually see. From the front, it looks totally fine, but let's rotate that sculpture 90 degrees. Oh my God, there it is. King Tut. Nobody would have ever thought that King Tut wasn't a normal human being born on Earth, but when you see his head from an ancient Egyptian sculpture, it's too big, just like the others. And there are all these skulls that have been found that look just like that. These are over in Peru. Elongated skulls, just like what we were seeing here. Multiple skulls have been found like this, some of which are actually at the Rosicrucian Museum, the AMORC Museum, a little north of San Francisco. You can actually go see these skulls. So this is not something that's been fabricated. These have been discovered. They have yet to be explained. And when the gods came here, they brought with them a message, a mythological message, the most important thing they want us to know. They kept doing it over and over again, and they encoded this secret into all these different mythologies. The secret is this: a 25,000-year cycle in the Earth's orbit, which is called the precession of the equinoxes. Why would they do that? Why would they keep telling us the same message over and over again? Well, first of all, let's examine how that message came in. It was two notable historians in the 1960s, Giorgio de Santillana and Herta van de Schend, came up with this amazing work called Hamlet's Mill. And what you see on this book cover is the earth at the bottom with a tree coming out of it. That's often called in the ancient myths the world tree. Now, Graham Hancock believes that he's one of many that illustrate what these Santillana and van de Schend's scholarship concluded, which is that certain archaic myths from all over the world were co-opted, no other word will really do, to serve as vehicles for a body of complex technical data concerning the precession of the equinoxes. This includes everything from exact numbers to colors, all sorts of different ways they did this, but they did it over and over again. This is a mill. This is what you use to grind grain. In the middle of it is a central axis, then you have a sideways pole coming off of it at 9 degrees with a millstone through the pole. The pole goes through the middle of the millstone, and then you grind the millstone around this well where you put your seeds in, and then the seeds get ground up and they turn into grain. Then you pull the grain out through that little channel that you see in the front on the left. Here's another illustration of a different mill in which all the grinding is done in the middle of a bowl-shaped declivity, but you again have the central axis. Now, in these ancient myths, what they keep having is the idea that this central axis of the corn mill breaks, and that the whole mill breaks down, but that in the aftermath, there is this golden age that's created. Now, Santillana and van de Schend believed that this metaphor of the corn mill is a metaphor of the Earth's axis. That as the miller is going around and grinding, it's the equivalent of the Earth's axis spinning in this 26,000-year cycle. And then these myths also have all the numbers of the precession, all the exact technical data is there. So Santayana and van de Shen conclude the original Amlodi, as his name was in Icelandic legend, which became Hamlet, is an elusive carrier of fate who must yield once his mission is accomplished and sink once more into concealment in the depths of time to which he belongs. He is the Lord of the Golden Age, the once and future king. Well, that's pretty darn interesting. Hamlet is the Lord of the Golden Age. This hero that shows up in all these ancient myths, the breakdown of the mill, corresponds to the coming Golden Age. They track this myth, this is a quote from the book, from the Northland to Rome, Finland, Iran, India, in Polynesian island legends, and the image stands for an astronomical process, the shifting of the sun through the signs of the zodiac, each of which is 2,160 years, adds up to 25,920 years together. So, each age brings a world era, a twilight of the gods. Great structures collapse, pillars topple, which supported the great fabric. Floods and cataclysms herald the shaping of a new world. And that's obviously happening to us now. As we follow the clues, stars, numbers, colors, plants, forms, verse, structures, a huge framework of connections is revealed at many levels. This is a true edifice, something like a mathematical matrix, a world image that fits many levels, all of it kept in order by strict measure. So Graham Hancock did all this research tying together Hamlet's Mill, and his conclusion was, it's not some quantum physics thing like the Jungian collective unconscious. It's actually a deliberate effort made by the gods who were contacting every culture, who looked human, maybe a little bit different, and then gave us this amazing information. And they always told us about the Earth's axis, this wobbling cycle, that it ends at a certain time, which is the end of the Mayan calendar, the year 2012, and that it ushers in a golden age. Now, in my work, and it's extensively documented in the book, I have gone through the entire solar system and showed how the planets are all experiencing climate change, just like the Earth. This appears to be the literal fulfillment of the 2012 prophecies. And in the book, I also argue, and we'll do that throughout the rest of this weekend, that the galaxy is pushing us into this new energy zone, that the solar system is actually colliding with a cloud of energy that has a higher, I hate to use the term, but vibrational frequency. It's a higher density of energy in the source field. And that higher density is speeding up the vibration of atoms and molecules on Earth. It's making everything rev up and go faster and faster. Well, sure enough, if you actually go back through the fossil record, we find that there is a 25,000-year cycle in human evolution. 50,000 years ago, more or less, everybody on Earth suddenly started to use tools that were not just for survival, but had ritual purposes for making art and for religion and spirituality. 50,000 years ago, boom, everybody gets this upgrade, and they start doing that. 25,000 years ago, all of a sudden the Neanderthals die out worldwide. And we also have at the same time a dying out of all these large creatures like the saber-toothed tiger and the woolly mammoth that were threatening to human life. Now we're at the end of another cycle once again, and we're seeing Dr. John Hawkes, a University of Wisconsin anthropologist, showing us that in the last 5,000 years, human DNA has evolved 100 times faster than ever before in history, to the point that the DNA molecule is now 7% different on a molecular level than it was 5,000 years ago. So I believe that this will be a shift in space, time, matter, energy, and biology as we know it. I lay out all the clues for that in this book, and throughout the rest of this weekend, those of you who are lucky enough to be here, you're going to hear the whole thing. Hundreds and hundreds more slides coming. This is just an introduction. All of this with the interplanetary climate change and the measurable DNA change that's happening now, that also happened 25,000 years ago, that also happened 50,000 years ago. This is the smoking gun. The gods knew what they were talking about. That wobble in the Earth's axis doesn't appear to be happening randomly. It appears to be the result of a force field that is pushing its way through. And as the Earth is actually pushing through the field, it exerts torque on the Earth's axis. And the field, whatever the structure of energy is the Earth is moving through, it takes the Earth 25,920 years to move through that energy, which I'm going to argue is geometric in nature. That energetic geometry takes 25,000 years, 920 at the end, 25,920 years to move our way through. And then this energy shift occurs. The Founding Fathers appear to know everything about this. Now, if you want to know what's really going on with the so-called Illuminati, and why these people are so interested in preserving their bloodlines, why there's a royal succession right of kings, it's because those people with the funny heads, they didn't disappear. They've been here and they've interbred more and more, and they look enough like us that you don't see the difference. In fact, 15% of everybody on Earth in all different races, regardless of whether it's Asian, African, whatever, 15% of everybody has measurable extraterrestrial DNA. That's one of the things I heard from these guys on the inside who work in these black projects. So it's not like it's only this selective group, but they still want to preserve that magical power that they had in that other form, when they were in this godlike form. That's what they trace themselves to. If you get to the highest levels on the inside, they laugh at you. You've seen these images of Egyptian gods so many times, but because you're not conditioned to think that extraterrestrials could look just like you and me, you don't notice the differences. You don't notice the narrow rib cage. You don't notice the funny waist with the little pot belly. You don't notice the elongated skull. You don't think about the fact that those skulls have actually been found, that humans could evolve on other planets from a galactic quantum template that literally takes Luc Montagnier's test tube with water in it and turns that water into DNA, or takes Pacheco's test tube with water in it and a little sand that's been sterilized, and you get these little microorganisms growing. I'm saying that's going to happen on any planet, and it's going to spiral its way into humanity. And human beings can get to a much higher level of evolution than what we're at right now here on Earth. And I believe the Founding Fathers inherited this prophecy directly from these gods, who then, over time, just blended in with the population. So let's look at some interesting things about the Great Seal. First of all, at the top, it says Annuit Septis. Anu, the word root of Anu is year, like annual. Septis is conception, it's born. So it means the year is born. But in this case, the precession, the 25,920 year cycle, is also called the Great Year. And circumstantial evidence, which is very strong, and I'm going to show you all that evidence, shows that that's the year they're talking about being born. It's the end of the cycle. And of course, the pineal gland, the symbolism of the pineal gland being awakened, the pyramid factors in very prominently, which ties it into ancient Egypt, ancient civilizations. The gods built the pyramid, these people with the large heads. And what the heck is going on at the bottom with Novus Ordo Seclorum? Well, this brings us to the writing of Charles A.L. Totten. Now here he is as a younger man, and he was in the military. You can see him there in full military regalia in the Civil War. And then here he is later in life. Now, it seems pretty clear that this guy was a highly initiated Freemason. I haven't done that research, but I absolutely believe he's got to be 33rd degree. In 1882, he had already become, by that point, a first lieutenant in the 4th Artillery of the U.S. Army, and he wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Treasury, Charles Folger, on February 10th, 1882. And here's what he said. This is a direct quote from Charles Totten. Novus Ordo Seclorum is a quotation from Virgil's 4th eclogue. I put the word Virgil's in there because that's what he means. That's what everybody knows eclogues are back in those days. And was borrowed in turn by Virgil from the mystic Sibylline records. The Sibylline records were actually channeled texts held as the highest and most heavily guarded treasure in Roman history because they were so accurate. They predicted Constantine by name 800 years before he showed up, predicted Hannibal by name. All these different disasters and events that happened in Roman history were in those texts, and they go right through to the end of the entire age, which is obviously happening now in our time. Now here in Charles Totten's letter of where Novus Ordo Seclorum came from, he actually quotes the original passage. Now this is what the Founding Fathers were using The guy's name was Thompson, who actually did this quote in the first place. This is what they were using when they made that symbol on the dollar. This is what they excerpted it from. A mighty order of ages, novus ordo seclorum, a mighty order of ages is born anew, novus, new. Well, the order of ages would be the precessional cycle. And there's, again, plenty of other evidence that that's what they're talking about if you read the whole thing. Both the prophetic virgin and Saturnian kingdoms now return. Well, what would a Saturn kingdom be? Humans that didn't originate on Earth, gods, coming from outer space. Now, it says, a new progeny, that means an offspring, a birth, a new type of birth, a new type of human. Now a new progeny is let down from the lofty heavens. The boy soon to be born, in whom the Iron Age shall come to an end, and the Golden One shall arise again in the whole earth. That is mind-blowing. How many people knew, well, don't raise your hand because you've all read my website, probably some of you know, but how many people knew that that was on the dollar, that that's actually what it was quoted from? It's unbelievable. But Totten's letter doesn't quote the whole thing. There's other stuff that's in that same passage. Here it is. Whatso tracks remain of our old wickedness, once done away, shall free the earth from never ceasing fear. That sounds pretty good. He shall receive the life of gods and see heroes with gods commingling, and himself be seen of them. This is disclosure. And not just the government telling you that UFOs are real, that humans are in the ships, but the UFOs actually showing up at the end of the age, which is written in all these other prophetic traditions we can talk about, including ones that are modern. And with his Father's worth, reign o'er a world at peace. Now, I believe this has gotten horribly distorted by the so-called Illuminati. I believe the original prophecy was positive. It will remain positive. It's written into Christianity. It's written into Islam with the prophecy of the Mahdi, which is their own Messiah. It's written into Hinduism. They're looking for the return of Krishna and Kalki. Every ancient prophecy, as we said, with this tradition, they talk about the coming golden age. And it's all hidden in the myths with the corn mill and all this stuff. It's in every tradition worldwide. This is the core of the prophecy. The gods return, heroes and gods commingling, humans on earth commingling with the gods, and we receive the life of gods. We become the golden one that arises in the whole earth. Humanity itself is transformed into some other form. Now, a lot of people laugh when I show them this, but after George Washington died, they drew him in an ascended state over and over again. They drew him becoming one of the gods. Here's the little angels putting a wreath on his head as he becomes an ascended being. Here he is as an embodiment of Zeus, holding Zeus's sword, and in that godly position, the finger going up represents him tapping into the pineal gland. Now here's another image of George Washington's ascension. In fact, I believe that's what I forget the exact name of this. This is out of Manly Palmer Hall's book. But another thing that's crazy that people don't realize is if you look down here, there's this god on the throne with the golden eagle representing the phoenix above him, and he's twice the height of all the other people in the room. Oh, well, that can't mean anything. That's just got to be a perspective difference. No, it's not. This is, again, showing you the gods. George Washington ascended up with the gods. And here's Lincoln. George Washington literally brings Lincoln up, and Lincoln also was believed to have ascended when he got to the end of his life. And so Washington puts the wreath on his head, which means he's now an ascended god. So they actually believed that the Founding Fathers didn't have to reincarnate again, that they automatically go into the Golden Age and the ascended state as this happens. Just to cement the point home, and this is the last thing that our video is going to end on, here we have the inside of the U.S. Capitol Dome. It's the most famous thing you see in America other than the Statue of Liberty or the Washington Monument. It's that big dome with the steeple on top. But if you go inside the dome and you look up, you see a painting in there, and this is the wide view of it, and it's called The Apotheosis of George Washington, and it's openly titled that. What does apotheosis mean? Man becomes God. And here, as you can see, George Washington is posing with all of the gods. They all have their little regalia. These are human extraterrestrials that came to the earth. They're being depicted here. He's now among them. And they show him sitting on a rainbow, which clearly indicates, if the gods weren't enough, that he has now ascended, because there are many illustrations of Jesus after his ascension also showing him sitting on a rainbow, indicating he's now in an ascended state. And if you go over to the Tibetan traditions, there are many, many illustrations of the rainbow body, which literally means that as you ascend and your body dematerializes, you start to get all these wonderful rainbow colors that are visible around you. That's the rainbow body state. Now here's something else that's very interesting. You see those little circles around the ring? There's a total of 72 of those circles. And of course, the Earth's precession moves by 1 degree every 72 years. If you add up 72 times 360, that gives you your precessional cycle, the whole cycle of 25,920 years. Now, inside each of those little circles is a 5-pointed star. And if you look really closely, there's a pine cone after every second ring. After every second circle is a little bitty pine cone mounted there, again showing the pineal gland symbolism. But let's look at those stars. There's 5 pointed stars, and there's 72 of them. You add that up, it's a total of 360 points. Now, if you take that 360 points, the total number of points, and then you multiply it again by the number of stars, which is 72, you come out with 25,920. This is one of the ways in which it is clear that the Founding Fathers wanted to encode this information about the precession into that illustration of what's going on around George Washington when he reaches apotheosis and he becomes a god. William Henry has talked extensively about this. This is really his domain. So I want to give him full credit for that. His website is williamhenry.net. We've spoken together a bunch of times. He does a lot more on this than I'm going into now. Next, I want you to look at the side area below the tall windows. You'll see on the right-hand side a frieze, as it's called, F-R-I-E-Z-E. It's a long illustration of various events in American history that's around the dome. And there's various examples, you know, when the settlers came with the American Indians. But here's the one that I'm the most interested in. This is the moment where Cortez met Montezuma. And of course, as you look closely, you see Montezuma he's got the same interesting position of the gods. His hand is aimed at this fire that has a serpent in it. The serpent, again, it represents the pineal gland, the fire of the pineal gland, the awakening. The serpent is the uraeus, that kundalini energy coming up. But notice what's behind Montezuma in this image. It's the Mayan calendar. The Mayan calendar that ends in 2012, inside the Capitol Dome. Just to make sure that you got the point. Apotheosis, 2012, the third eye, the sigil on the back of the dollar bill. They wanted you to know this. They quoted Novus Ordo Seclorum saying that people will become gods. Why do you think the gods know that this is what's going to happen? Because they know about this cycle. They've seen it happen before. They're really excited about it, and they're going to be coming back very soon. That's what all this UFO stuff is about. And last but not least, we see what appears to be a code hidden in the pyramid. If you take the date 1776 at the bottom, and then you look at the Mayan calendar cycle, one of the basic Mayan cycles is called a Katun. It's 19.7 years long. You begin that Katun in 1756, and sure enough, one of the Katuns ends very close to the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1776. So if you can consider that the Mayan Katun might be symbolized by these 13 courses, then 1756 would be the beginning of all these precursor events that they did to directly lead to America being founded. It didn't just start out of nowhere in 1776. It took this big 20-year process to build up to the Boston Tea Party and all these things they did. Well, you count 13 courses and you end up at the top in the year 2012, which is when the cycle ends and the pineal gland opens up. The year is born, Annuit Septis, Novus Ordo Seclorum, the new order of ages is born. The gods come back. We receive the life of gods and are seen together with them. The golden one arises again in the whole earth. Now, in case anybody knocks me and says, well, 13 Katuns doesn't mean anything. The Mayan Katun, 13 means nothing. Not true. Spanish conquistadors, when they went to Central America, they saw that everybody at that time was using a 13 katon system to count time. And this is an actual illustration sketched by the Spanish of that counting system of 13 katons. So it was very widely known. And there's your Templar cross up at the top, one of the symbols of the Illuminati. So they got this information a long time ago. They got really excited. And I believe that part of the timing of the Declaration of Independence was to be on that dividing line of 1776, which also Kabbalistically is 888 plus 888, which is another symbolism of the duality of positive and negative that makes the universe. So, look, it's all been laid out for you here. You look back on what I've said about the source field. We're seeing that there is a whole lot of science that we don't now possess. Information that leads to the understanding that we are sharing a consciousness with each other. Scientific discoveries are happening in different places around the world, and we tap into each other's minds. DNA is emerging directly out of the source field to create human life. One species in Garyev's research, the frog eggs were zapped and transformed into the salamander eggs. There is a provable 25,000-year cycle in human evolution. 50,000 years ago, boom, we start using all these tools for spiritual purposes and for art for the first time. We become a lot more interesting to hang out with, for the gods probably. 25,000 years ago, the Neanderthals all die out, the big bad creatures all die out, the saber-toothed tigers, the woolly mammoths, the ones that threaten human life, boom, they're gone. And now we're seeing the DNA molecule becoming 7% different. The rate of evolution has increased by 100 times faster in the last 5,000 years. Provable microbiological evidence that we're changing. We can prove that the solar system is transforming, that climate change is not just an effect on Earth, it's happening throughout the solar system. So when Garyev transformed those salamander eggs with light and captured that genetic code on the photons, zapped it into the frog eggs, I believe that's what's happening to us right now. We're moving into this new energy zone. It's activating the planets, it's heating them up, it's making the molecules actually move faster, but it's also increasing the source field vibration, which is making us become more intelligent. And the Flynn effect proves that. IQ scores have been going up 3 points per decade for over a century. It's another provable fact that's in the book. The Founding Fathers definitely knew about this. They wrote it everywhere they could. It's in the Capitol Dome, the apotheosis of George Washington. They drew him in an ascended form, sitting with the gods on a rainbow. They drew the Mayan calendar on the side. They put the 25,920 points, if you multiply the points in those stars by 72. Then they have it on the Great Seal of the United States, the awakened pineal gland, the pyramid with 13 courses. If 1776 represents the end of the first cycle, 2012 would be the end. So here we are at this unique juncture in our time. We have UFOs showing up more and more in our skies. I have extensively documented on my website, divinecosmos.com, this ongoing saga of disclosure, which appears to be building up to something. There's all these articles coming out about UFOs, UFOs, UFOs in the mainstream media. I don't think we're going to stay ignorant. I don't think this is going to remain mysterious. I believe that we are going through a galactic transmutation of what it means to be human. I believe that most of the people who are visiting us are good. They founded Christianity. They founded all the major world religions. They worked behind the scenes to give us what we needed to evolve, to become more loving people, to be more attuned with the source field, so that our pineal glands can awaken and we can be ready to become those light body people who are predicted to come here at this time of the end of the age. Everybody who watches my videos says, I've seen all your videos. And then I say, did you read my last article on the website? And then they go, you have a website? divinecosmos.com. Once or twice every month, at least twice a month, I write a new article. So part of what you need to do when you watch this video is don't stop here. Go back to my website, divinecosmos.com, look it up, read all this stuff. This is just a tiny portion of what I've done. Yes, you have to buy the book. It's only $30 retail. You can get it for like $18 on Amazon. It's totally awesome. This is just an eyedropper of what's in there. I want to thank you for watching this, and I want to thank you all for being here. I'm David Wilcok. See you in 2013. Thank you very much.